So the steps to solving a quadratic equation by completing the square. Step 1, if the coefficient of a is greater than 1, go to step 2. Otherwise, divide both sides of the equation by the a value. So that means if the term in front of your x squared is anything other than 1, you have to divide by the a value, and we'll look at some examples like that. Then you want to get the variables alone on one side of the equation. We're going to complete the square of the resulting binomial, factor the perfect square trinomial and write it as a square, and then use the square root property to solve for x. So here, the a value is 1, so we're going to move on. We're going to get all of our variables on the same side. And looking at this, I can already see that I've made a mistake, so I'm going to see if I can clear it out and rework it with text. So we'll see how it goes. So we're going to have x squared, and it should have been plus 6x because I would have moved it to the other side. And then you leave a blank, and it's equal to 27. So here, for the next step of this, it wants you to complete the square. So I'm going to take this 6, and I'm going to divide it by 2 and get 3, and then square it, so I should be adding 9 to both sides. I'm going to go back and do that in this blue color so that you can see that it's like a second step. So I'm not going to do it in this blue color. I'm going to try and do it in this blue color again. So plus 9. And then I'm going to do the same thing to the end of the 27. And I'm going to try and do this in this blue color again. Plus 9. And then I'm going to go back to the pink so that you can see that nothing else is added. So we added the plus 9 to both sides. That was the completing the square part. So now we're going to write the, we're going to factor the perfect square and write it as a square. So we're going to have x plus 3 squared is equal to 36. So then we're going to take the square root of both sides, and we're going to get x plus 3 is equal to the square root of 36, which is plus or minus. And this doesn't look right to me, but you understand what I'm doing. So then we're going to move the 3 to the other side. So we're going to have x equals negative 3. And I'm just going to write them both down. Plus or minus 6. So our two answers, negative 3 plus 6 is 3. And negative 3 minus 3 is negative 9. So here on our second example, we have x squared plus 2x minus 11. We're going to move the 11 to the other side. So we have x squared plus 2x. This plus 1 has been added in the next step. So when we look at our b value, which is 2, and we divide it by 2, we get 1. Then we square that and get 1. So I've added this one and this one, because anything you do to one side of an equation, you have to do to the other. Then we're going to factor our trinomial and write it as a square. So it's x plus 1 squared equals 12. Take the square root of both sides. So x plus 1 equals plus or minus the square root of 12. Move the 1 to the other side. So we have negative 1 plus or minus 2 square roots of 3. You can't actually combine these because you have a whole number, or an integer and a radical. So they're not like terms, so you just leave the answer like this. These both have variables other than 1, a value other than 1. So what I technically do is I go ahead and put the variables on one side together and the constant on the side by itself. And then I divide by the whole number. It doesn't matter as long as you divide each term by your a value. So in C, we have 2x squared minus 7x divided by 2 equals 4 divided by 2. Well, x squared, or 2x squared divided by 2 is x squared. 7 divided by 2 doesn't come out to a whole number, so we just leave it 7 over 2. And then 4 divided by 2 is 2. Then we have to complete the square. We still take our b value, which is 7 over 2, and divide it by 2, which gives us 7 over 4. And then we square that and get 49/16. So I've added 49/16 to both sides of my equation. Then when I factor, I'm going to have x minus 7 over 4, that binomial squared, equals 81 over 16. Take the square root of both sides and you get x minus 7 over 4 equals plus or minus 9 over 4, because the square root of 81/16 is 9/4. Then I'm going to add the 7/4 to the other side. So I have 7/4 plus 9/4 and 7/4 minus 9/4. So I end up with 4 and negative 1/2. In our last example, we have 3x squared minus 9x plus 8. This is written in standard form. Some tricks here or tips that you may appreciate when you're graphing a quadratic equation. This number right here is your y-intercept. Completing the square is typically what you use it for, in my opinion, the most, is writing equations in vertex form, and it will tell you the vertex of your parabola, which is where it changes direction. So it's either the bottom or the top, depending on your a value. But here we have 3x squared minus 9x equals negative 8. We have to divide everything by 3. So we get x squared minus 3x equals negative 8 over 3. We're going to take our b value, which is negative 3, and divide it by 2, which gives us negative 3 over 2. We're going to square that and add it to both sides. So we added the 9/4 and we added the 9/4. Then we factor our trinomial and get x minus 3/2 squared. And hopefully you've noticed by now that this term in the binomial is always this number divided by 2. But we have x minus 3/2 squared equals negative 5/12. We take the square root of both sides. So x minus 3/2 is equal to plus or minus the square root of negative 5 over 12. To simplify this completely, you have to take the square root of the negative 1, which is I, and you have to rationalize the denominator. And when you do all that to simplify negative 5 over 12, you get I squared root of 15 over 6. You add the 3/2 to the other side, and it just stays 3/2 plus or minus I squared root of 15 divided by 6. You don't have to try and put that together because you can't. But something else I did want to show you why I have you on here is that when you write things in, when you've completed the square, it can put stuff into vertex form. So here, if we look at this first example, I'm going to look right here at the x plus 3 squared equals 36. If you move the 36 back to the other side, and you get, helps if you'll let me write, x plus 3 squared minus 36 equals 0. Here, the vertex of this parabola is negative 3, negative 36. We haven't really looked at this year, and if we have time, we will, and if we don't have time, we won't. But I did want you to at least see it a little bit. So the vertex is negative 3, negative 36. And that actually comes from setting this equal to 0 and solving, which gives you negative 3. And this negative 36 just comes straight out of there. It's HK. So here, if we'd rewritten this one, x plus 1 squared minus 12 equals 0, the vertex would be -1, -12. Same concept. But this is generally why completing the square is a major focus, and this is primarily one of the times that I use it, unless I already have a perfect square or I'm required to solve using completing the square. I find that the quadratic formula or factoring tends to work better for me. But if I do need to find the vertex, I absolutely use completing the square because it puts it into vertex form for me. So it is a valuable skill for you guys to have. You do have IXL and paper homework, so make sure that you're getting both of those done. Let me know if you have any questions. Miss you guys. Bye.